He woke up to the sound of someone hitting an iron pipe in his head. My wrists ache from the cold. The steel of the handcuffs cuts into my skin. The light hurts the eyes, the white walls, the smell of antiseptic, the dim lamp hovering near the ceiling. The air is thick and still, as if the room itself is not breathing. A woman in a white coat stands in front of him. Her posture was even, her hair was gathered, her eyes were calm, impassive. There was not a shadow of sympathy in them. Alexei asks hoarsely, "Where am I?" The woman replies without emotion, "Safe." Her voice sounds smooth, almost mechanical, as if it's just another protocol, not a human conversation. Alexei takes a breath, tries to look around, but the chain on his wrists rings dully. "Safe? I'm in your mother's handcuffs." His voice cracks, between anger and fear. "As a precaution," the woman replies calmly. He looks away, trying to remember something. Images flash before my eyes. An office, a stack of papers, a call from the boss, the road, flashing headlights, and then a flash of light and darkness. The woman takes a step closer, and there is caution in her voice. "Alexei, do you remember the last month of your life?" He smiles, but it comes out uncertain, almost painful. "Of course I remember. It was the best month of my life." She is silent. He just stands in front of her for a few seconds, and then presses the button on the recorder. The click is loud, like a gunshot. "That's why you're here," she says softly. Everything freezes. You can only hear Alexei breathing heavily, trying to understand the meaning of her words. Therefore, what does this mean? Why is he here? He looks at his hands, which are bruised under the metal. The skin is chafed, and the fingers are trembling. My eyes darted around the room, but there was no way out. No door, no window, just light and the hum of ventilation. A thought flashes through my head. Maybe this is a dream? But if this is a dream, why does everything hurt so much? Why does the cold feel to the bones? Why does the heart beat as if the chest is about to burst? The ventilation noise gets louder, the air vibrates, he closes his eyes, and the world begins to melt. The rain stretched in grey streaks across the glass, as if someone was combing the sky with long, cold fingers. Alexei drove the car along an empty highway, and only the quiet radio in the background reminded him that there was still life somewhere. A missed call was flashing on the panel. The screen lit up again. Olga Viktorovna. He sighed and answered without slowing down. "Olga Viktorovna, everything is under control. I'm finishing the project. There's very little left." There was no trust or irritation in her voice, just the dry, measured rigor of a person who is used to controlling everything. 2 weeks before the report is not a little bit, Alexei. You're putting it off again. He grinned mechanically, as if trying to ease the tension, although the laughter came out muffled and strained. "I'll do everything, I promise. There's work for a couple of days, don't worry." And then, a sharp light. Blue reflections flashed in the mirror, like short lightning bolts. He slowed down and smoothly pulled over to the curb. The patrol car's headlights stung my eyes through the rain. The inspector went to the window, lowered his head slightly below the visor. "Documents. Put your phone away." Alexei nodded, but did not hang up the phone. "I'm sorry, I can't. My boss is on the line. If I quit, he'll fire me." Olga Viktorovna's voice on the other end became sharper, but already distant, as if in a dream. "Alexei, you're looking for excuses again. I expect a report in the morning." The inspector leaned closer, and the smell of wet uniforms and cigarettes hit him in the face. "What's wrong with your eyes?" "It's fine. I just didn't sleep last night," Alexei replied, trying to sound calm. "Show me your tongue," the inspector said coldly. "What? Show your tongue. Did you use drugs?" He felt something snap inside him, anger rising in his throat. "Are you crazy?" "I was at work." The second patrolman approached, and they exchanged glances. One of them took out a tablet and started entering data. "We are processing it," he said shortly. "Wait." "No need. Let's make a deal. I have 30,000 on the card. I'll give it all. Just don't take the car." The first one looked at him as if he was something pathetic and already uninteresting. 30. The issue is solved in 100 days. Alexei grinned, but there was nothing human about it. I don't have that kind of money. I'm a cost estimator, an ordinary person, a car on loan. No offense, then. Take the car to the parking lot, the inspector said and held out his hand. When the cold metal touched his wrists, his heart trembled. The same sound, the same clang, as then, somewhere in another room, in another time. Everything seemed to repeat itself, as if someone had pressed repeat scene. The world suddenly became viscous. The inspector's face swam, and the helmet on his head turned into a white spot. The car's headlights swelled like huge eyes, and everything around lost its shape. Olga Viktorovna continued to say something from the receiver, but the words stretched out, mixing with the roar of the rain and the pulse in her ears. He blinked, and the noise of the road disappeared. There was no more car, no more rain. Only silence and white light. The smell of antiseptic. He was sitting in the same room, in the same handcuffs. And on the contrary, it's her again. Olga Viktorovna. The same pose, the same cold eyes, the same question in her voice. Alexei, do you remember the last day of your work? He slowly raised his head. And suddenly I realized that maybe I hadn't woken up yet. The kitchen was dim. Only the lantern from behind the windows made its way through the curtain and put a strip of light on the table. The smell of coffee and cigarettes hung in the air. There were 2 mugs on the table, one empty, the other still warm. Alexei sat in silence, twirling the spoon with his fingers and watching the thin film of tea glisten at the bottom of the mug. Jura was sitting across from him, with disheveled hair and a cigarette in his mouth. On his face is the satisfied confidence of a man who knows more than he should. He said, "Have you been awake again?" Alexei nodded without looking up. "I wake up at the same time every time." Jura grinned and tapped the ashes into an empty cup. "And I've learned how to control dreams." Alexei asked, "What does it mean to manage?" "Sleep consciously and know that you are dreaming. Do whatever you want." He spoke slowly and confidently, as if he were reading the instructions for takeoff. Alexei listened. His eyes wandered over the wall, where the shadow from the lamp trembled from the movement of the fire. Jura spoke a little louder. "It's simple. You need to remember that you are in a dream, and you can do anything. If you want, fly. If you want, fall down. If you want, disappear." He leaned closer and continued. The first one. Think about controlling your sleep all evening. Don't let go of that thought. Second. Cover your nose with your hand every half hour and try to breathe. If you can, then you're in a dream. The third. Set the alarm for 4 in the morning. When you wake up, go back to sleep. And finally, try to read something in a dream. If the words are floating, it means you're inside a dream. Alexei asked, "Why all this?" Jura smiled. "Because there are no consequences. Everything is possible there." He got up, stubbed out his cigarette and went to the door. "Try it, you'll understand." When the door closed, the room remained silent and there was a faint smell of tobacco. Alexei sat for a long time, then turned off the light and lay down. My thoughts were bothering me. Jura's phrases were spinning one after another. He tried to push them away, but the harder he tried, the more clearly he heard his friend's voice in his head. "Close your nose and inhale." He obeyed, inhaled, and felt the air. Light, smooth, and cool. His nose is pinched by his hand, but is breathing. He realized that it was impossible. The room seemed to shake. The lines of the ceiling spread out. The lantern outside the window flashed and spread the light across the glass. The floor became softer. The sound of the refrigerator went somewhere under the water. He was standing in the middle of the street. The same streetlight, the same buildings, but everything is quiet. It's too quiet. The air was still, smelling of ozone and wet asphalt. He looked at his hands. The skin seemed transparent. My heart was beating steadily, as if someone had pressed the start button. He raised his head and saw the roof, the one that Jura was talking about. You can jump off it if you realize you're dreaming. He walked forward, his footsteps thudding on the wet concrete. The lights of the lanterns were reflected underfoot, as if alive. He stopped at the edge and looked down. The city was reflected in puddles, as in a mirror. His face flashed in the reflection. It was someone else's. He stepped forward. There was no wind, no screaming, no falling. Just the light. The white ceiling, the lamp above the face, the smell of antiseptic. And the woman's voice is calm and cold. Alexei, tell me what you saw in your dream. He opened his eyes and realized that he was here again. The same light, the same cold. The same dream that never ends. Alexei opened his eyes and did not immediately realize where he was. The light was blinding, as if someone had placed the lamp too close. The alarm clock on the bedside table was flashing at 6:47, but the sound continued to go on, even though he had already turned it off a few seconds ago. He sat down, rubbed his eyes, and stared at his palms for a long time. Her skin is pale, and her nails look painted. He wiggled his fingers and heard a slight rustle, as if the skin was rustling. He got up and went to the kitchen. The kettle was boiling, but there was no steam. The water boiled noiselessly, the glass shook, but made no noise. He poured himself a cup of coffee, sipped it, and felt as if the taste had disappeared.
No Biternis, no Varmt, no céu.
The phone rang. On the screen is Olga Viktorovna. He clicked accept. The voice was clear, too clear, as if someone had turned on a recording. Alexei, are you coming to work today? Of course, he replied, but he didn't hear his own voice. The screen went blank. He looked out the window. It was raining outside, but the drops were moving slowly, as if someone had stretched the time. One of the drops stopped right on the glass, froze, and no longer slid down. He touched it with his finger, and the glass was dry. Something heavy clenched in my chest. He went to get ready. The shirt seemed alien, as if it had been made for another person. In the mirror, the reflection did not move immediately after him. It was delayed by a fraction of a second. He tried to blink, and the reflection did so a little later. He staggered back. Outside, the air was thick as fog, but it smelled like iron. The sound of footsteps sounded strange, as if the echo was running ahead, not behind. Passers-by walked by, but he couldn't recognize their faces. They blurred like watercolors on wet paper. He tried to see at least one, but his eyes kept sliding, unable to find focus. The car stopped. The driver sat in silence and his face was not reflected in the mirror. To the office, Alexei said. The car started off without a sound. The city outside the window was floating. The signs were changing places. The buildings were repeating themselves, as if someone had looped the same block. He realized that he had been driving for too long. No turns, no traffic jams, no people. Just a road, the same and endless. He said softly to himself, "This is a dream." And the air seemed to respond with a faint ringing. The car slowed down and stopped in the middle of the street. He went out. There's a building in front of him. The sign on the wall reads Investigative Department Number 4. He smiled with relief, but inside he still didn't believe it. A dim light was on in the hallway. It smelled of paper, coffee, and something sour and sickly. He walked down the hall and opened the door to his office. There were folders, documents, a pen, and a dictaphone on the table. Everything was exactly the same as last time. Only in the chair opposite, there was a woman in a white coat. She looked straight at him and said calmly, "Alexei, you have come again." He opened his mouth, but there were no words. The room shook, the light buzzed, and the ceiling began to float. She didn't move. Her eyes seemed infinitely deep, as if there were no pupils behind them, but the entrance to another room. He heard his own voice, but he didn't know if he'd said it out loud.
I'm awake, aren't I?
She nodded. Of course you're awake. He lowered his gaze. His wrists were handcuffed again. The lamp flashed, the air tore, and everything disappeared. He woke up and in the dark did not immediately realize where he was. There was no lamp, but the ceiling barely glowed with a soft grey light, as if someone had turned on the dawn inside the room. There are still the same handcuff marks on his hands. The skin is red, there are indented marks, and the fingers are trembling slightly. He got up and felt that the floor was cold and a little sticky. When he approached the wall, his fingers left a wet trail. He bent down and looked closer. No, it's not water, it's something red. There's a thick stain on the wall, like a palm smeared with blood. He jerked his hand away and his breathing quickened. It was as if someone was whispering inside, softly and indistinctly, but with each word getting closer. Wake up. Alexei opened the door and went out into the corridor. The fluorescent lights were on, and the air smelled of ozone and metal. He walked a few steps, but the corridor did not end. The same floor, the same walls, the same doors. He tried to turn around, but it was the same behind him. The same section was repeated over and over again. Then he stopped. My heart was beating louder than my footsteps. Hey, is anyone there? Stop it, he shouted. The voice went into a hum and returned from afar. Is there anyone? There's silence in response. He clenched his fists and felt something sticky under his nails. I looked down and saw blood on my palms. No scratches, no cuts, just blood, as if he was holding something alive and let it go. He wiped his hands on his shirt, but the stains didn't disappear. The cloth absorbed the blood and turned dark. He walked on, almost ran. The doors on both sides of the hallway were identical, white with numbers that changed every time he blinked. There was a sign on one of the doors, office number 407. He stopped, his heart skipped a beat. That was the name of his old project, the one he once defended before the commission. He took hold of the handle. It was warm. There is silence inside. Desk, folders, voice recorder. There's a familiar blueprint on the wall, the Central Park Beautification Project. He came closer. The letters suddenly began to move, spread out, and form other words. This is a dream. Wake up. You're not here. He squeezed his eyes shut, squeezed his head, but the words continued to sound inside, as if someone was dictating them directly into his brain. The door slammed behind him, and he whirled around and saw himself. When he was standing at the entrance, in the same clothes, with the same face. The second Alexei silently looked straight into the eyes. His gaze was as empty as a reflection in a dark glass. Who are you? Alexei asked. The doppelganger was silent. He just raised his hand slowly and calmly, and repeated, Wake up. The air became as thick as water, and the sound disappeared. The world began to disintegrate, as if the paper was burning from the center. He screamed, but the scream was drowned out by the light. The white ceiling returned, the lamp over my face, the same smell of antiseptic, the same cold. He opened his eyes and tried to speak, but his tongue wouldn't work. A woman in a white lab coat stood over him, her face calm and tired again. Alexei, she said, we've been losing you. Can you hear me? He nodded, but inside he felt like he didn't know who exactly nodded, him or the other one. He lay and listened to something dripping nearby, steadily, as if time itself had become liquid and was dripping onto the floor. My head is heavy, my thoughts are floating, and every movement is a rumble inside my skull. He opened his eyes. The room is blurred like an old photo that has lost color around the edges. The air smelled of chlorine and metal, but something else was making its way through it, familiar, warm, almost forgotten. The scent of her perfume. He got up on his elbows and saw a woman sitting on a chair. Her hair was pulled back into a bun, her hands were folded in her lap, and her eyes were tired but gentle. Lena, he breathed out. She smiled, and there was everything in that movement. Love, regret, forgiveness, but her lips did not tremble, the smile remained motionless. He blinked, the chair was empty, there were drops on the floor, either water or blood. He clenched his fists to make sure he could still feel his own fingers. Images flashed before my eyes. Hands on the steering wheel. Night. Jen. A female voice. Alexei, That's enough. You're not yourself. Flashing headlights. Hit. A scream, then silence. He didn't know if it was a dream or a memory. He walked over to the mirror that hung opposite the door. The reflection is shaky, like a mirror filled with water. He ran his hand over his face and left a mark on the glass, as if there was a thin film between him and the reflection. On the other side, the reflection also moved its hand, but a little later. He felt fear rising inside him, sticky and cold as butter. "What are you doing to me?" he whispered. In the reflection, the lips moved, but there were no words. Just a whisper, soft, almost affectionate. "Wake up." He closed his eyes. Jorah's face appeared in front of him. He was sitting in the kitchen smoking and looking away. Only now his eyes were as black as empty pits. "This is not a dream, Lech," said Jorah. "You just don't want to remember." "Remember what?" Alexei asked. Jorah did not answer. He just raised his hand, and the cigarette sizzled in his fingers, as if it were burning underwater. There was another flash, a wet road, a red light, and a silhouette in front of the car. Everything flashes by like stills from an old movie. He hears the screeching of tires and his own scream. Suddenly it was dark, and out of the darkness came a woman's voice, the same cold, medical voice. "Alexei, it was an accident. Do you remember?" He opened his eyes. "The room is white again. The light hurts my eyes. She stands next to me, still the same." He wanted to say that he remembered, but his tongue wouldn't work. Instead of words, only a wheeze came out. She looked calm, as if she was waiting for a confession. "You have to remember everything," she said. "It's important." Alexei pressed his palms to his head, and light seemed to pour out from inside. Flashes of faces, screams, fire, blood on his hands. He tried to push them away, but they kept coming back, pushing, racking their brains from the inside. "That's enough," he whispered. "Please stop." But instead of answering, she said softly, "You chose it yourself." He looked at her and suddenly realized that her eyes reflected not him, but another person. Tired, exhausted, with grey hair and too old to be won. He took a step back, stumbled, and fell to the floor. The air became thick, the light wavered. The world began to melt again. The last thing he heard was a voice. "Alexei, you're waking up." And suddenly it was dark. Just a heartbeat, and a distant, steady hum. He opened his eyes. His lungs burned as if he had suddenly emerged from underwater, and his heart was pounding. There was no ward, lamp, or white walls around. He was lying on the asphalt. Above him is the sky, grey and low. Crows are hovering in it, slowly flapping their wings, as if time was not in a hurry here. The air smelled of gasoline and wet stone. A man with an umbrella walked by without looking in his direction. Alexei got to his feet. His clothes were all dirty, wet, and heavy. He was standing in the middle of the street, and cars were driving past, splashing him. He went not knowing where. He turned the corner and suddenly realized that he knew this block. A cafe on the corner, a grey house with a peeling balcony, a newspaper kiosk. He visited here every day on his way to work. He smiled for the first time, but the smile disappeared when he noticed the woman at the window. She was standing with her back to him, wearing a blue coat, her hair tied up in a bun. The same scent, the same gesture as before. "Lena," he called. She turned around and smiled, but instead of her eyes, she had empty black circles, and dark liquid dripped from them, dripping onto her collar. He stepped back, stumbled, and ran. Passers-by walked by as if they saw nothing. He pushed the man, who turned around, and Alexei realized that he was seeing himself. The same age, wearing the same jacket, with the same expression on his face. The man whispered, "You wanted to come back." He ran on, past the bus stop, the shop windows, the people whose displays were his face. Each reflection in the glass repeated his movements with a slight delay. Sometimes it smiled when he wasn't smiling. Sometimes it whispered words that he did not utter. The rain had intensified, The asphalt glistened like glass, and in each puddle he saw himself, but in each a little different. Somewhere older, somewhere younger, somewhere with empty eyes. He covered his face with his hands. Enough, 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 he kept repeating. And suddenly I heard a voice, feminine and calm. Alexei, you're back. He raised his head, and Olga Viktorovna stood in front of him. Without a robe, in ordinary clothes, but with the same cold gaze. You're awake, she said. It's okay. He looked around. Everything froze. People stopped in place, cars froze, raindrops hung in the air. Only she was moving. Is this reality? He asked. That's what you chose, she replied. He took a step towards her, but the ground shook under his feet. The asphalt began to crack, as if black light was boiling under it. The city began to melt, the signs dripped from the facades, the windows blurred, the sky sank lower and lower. What's going on? Stop it, he shouted. She answered calmly, without fear. Refund. He felt the air become dense, as if pulling him back. The light tore through everything like an explosion of silence. He was standing in the white room again, the recorder on the table, the same ventilation sound, and the same question. Alexei, do you remember what happened? He wanted to shout, but instead of words, he heard only his own breathing. Smooth. Mechanical. It's like someone else's breathing, not him. He was sitting in the same room, and the white light burned out his eyes as well. The air felt glassy. There was a dictaphone on the table, its red light burning like a drop of blood. The woman stood opposite, still calm, still cold. Alexei, she said, will you talk? He nodded. The voice came out in a whisper. I don't understand what is real. As she approached, the shadow of her robe slid across the wall and stopped at his feet. All you've seen is your consciousness. It broke when you tried to forget. He raised his head. What did I do? You have to remember for yourself, she said. He closed his eyes and the world broke through. Flashes, wet road, headlights, screaming. Lena in a blue coat turned around for a moment. A blow, light, and silence. He saw himself in the car. I saw him wiping blood from the steering wheel with trembling hands. I saw Jura calling and saying that everything is under control. How he throws his phone into a ditch and drives on without looking in the mirror. He opened his eyes, the room rocked, and there was blood on his palms again. He tried to rub it off, but his skin wouldn't work. I killed her, he said. I killed Lena. The woman nodded. Then you came here by yourself. He looked at her. What is this place? It's in between. She came closer, her eyes no longer cold. We don't choose where to wake up. You just couldn't let go. He tried to stand up, but his body was alien, and the air was as thick as water. The sound is gone, only the rhythm of the heart remains. He whispered, Is this a dream? She replied, No, Alexei. This is the end of the dream. The light became stronger, the lamp above it lit up and the whiteness filled everything. He closed his eyes, but even through his eyelids he could see the light. And then I heard a small voice, my own, coming from somewhere far away. Wake up. He inhaled. And there was nothing else. And there was silence.